Hi, I'm Will.
And I'm Clark.
Today we're following up on Psychology Unit 10, Part 2. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe so we can keep making more videos for you guys. And without further ado,
let's get right into it.
Welcome back everyone to AP Psychology Unit 10, Part 2. Clark, start us off.
Let's start by defining what traits are, which are essentially people's characteristic pattern of their behaviors and their conscious motives. Basically, psychologists use traits to describe someone's personality. For example, describing someone as shy, arrogant, or confident would be by using their traits. Psychologists use personality trait tests, such as factor analysis and personality inventories, which are questionnaires that are used to assess selected personality traits. Personality inventories are empirically derived, which means from data and numbers. So it means that they should be objectively scored and super accurate. However, people can fake their answers to create a good impression. So objectivity does not always guarantee validity in this case. But common practice is to focus instead on the two main dimensions of personality, which are extroversion versus introversion and stability versus instability. You can kind of think of these four as kind of a spectrum where you can be super extroverted all the way to super introverted, etc. So Western cultures actually prize extroversion, and while the common stigmas are that extroverts are outgoing and introverts are shy, there's much more to this than what meets the eye. Extroverts get stimulation and energy from others, while introverts get their energy by being alone and recharge when they have more peace and quiet. Stable people will have a more ability to remain stable and balanced in situations, while unstable is a tendency to easily experience negative emotions. Psychologists use these four to kind of create a compass where they can evaluate people's personalities.
Alright everyone, so next we're going to talk about the Big Five. Now this is a concept developed by two psychologists, Robert McCrae and Paul Kosa. And both these psychologists' names are going to be on the screen somewhere, so make sure you guys write them down. They're very important. Okay, so these two people basically split up personality into 5 distinct traits. You have openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And each of these traits essentially defines who you are. As you can see, didn't mean to do that. As you can see, we have openness, which indicates how open-minded you are. Conscientiousness, how self-disciplined you are, etc., etc. But the problem is, let's say we take extroversion, for example, right? Extroversion is such a broad thing. Yeah, it's how social you are, but what does that really mean? Therefore, these two psychologists broke each of these traits even further. So they took extroversion, for example, and broke it into 6 traits. You have friendliness, gregariousness, activity level, cheerfulness, etc., etc. But then the same problem happens again, right? If we have assertiveness, for example, how do we determine how assertive you are? So they took even those small subsections and broke it down even further, right? Here we have assertiveness, and based on these 3 questions here, we can determine how assertive you are. If you want to read more about the Big Five, which is definitely going to be on the AP exam, you can click on the link in the description. It's this article right here. And in fact, you can take this personality test yourself. All right, let's move on. The next thing Myers talks about in this section is the person versus situation controversy. Clark, what does this exactly mean?
The controversy is whether the person or the situation is more influential in determining a person's behavior. The most accepted answer is that our personality traits usually stay pretty solid throughout our lives, but our traits cannot predict our interests and specific behavior from one situation to the next. Say you're a usual extrovert. While you may typically be sociable and enthusiastic around others, it doesn't mean that you will be so at any given time of the day. Our behavior changes all the time, and personality tests don't always predict how people will act. They can only give us clues about their average behavior.
All right, now we're going to talk about social cognitive theory. So this is a concept developed by Albert Bandura. And what this basically says is that personality is a combination of a person's traits and the situation they're in. Now there are 3 key terms you might want to write down in this section. First, we have social cognitive perspective, which views behavior as influenced by the interaction between people's traits and their social context. Next, we have behavioral approach, which focuses on the effects of learning on our personality development. And finally, we have reciprocal determinism, which is basically the interacting influences of behavior internal cognition, and the environment. So make sure you write these 3 things down.
Alright, the next thing we're going to talk about is assessing behavior in situations. This is essentially where psychologists drop the idea of using pencil and paper to determine behavior, and instead implement practical examples. For example, in World War II, candidates for spy missions were put into a simulation by psychologists. The psychologists studied their ability to handle stress, solve problems, maintain leadership, and withstand intense interrogation without blowing their cover. Again, this is all about how people react to situations instead of using pencil and paper methods for determining behavior.
Thanks, Will. Now for a little bit refresher, guys. Let's understand that social cognitive theories focus on how situations affect people and how the environment can influence their decisions. The benefits are that they acknowledge that traits alone do not determine our behavior, but interact with the environment. And some of the faults are that they underemphasize the importance of our unconscious motives, emotions, and our biologically influenced traits. Some of these key major personality theories that we've already talked about in this video and the last are the psychoanalytic theories with Freud, psychodynamic theories with Adler, Horney, and Jung, humanistic, which talked about self-actualization, and the recent ones, the trait and social cognitive that we just mentioned. But let's also remember the major research methods that psychologists use to investigate personalities, like the TAT and Rorschach ink blot tests, and the personality inventory tests, like the MMPI, factor analysis, and the Big Five. These 2 charts here kind of sum up most of the unit's information, so make sure that you have a good understanding of all of them.
Next, Myers talks about exploring the self, the basic question, who am I? And there are 2 key terms you might want to note down in this section. First, there's the self. Remember, there are many versions of yourself, right? We talked about in the last video your ideal versus your real self. So this can be positive or negative, right? In your perception of who you are, there might be a rich self, a successful self, a social self. But this can also go the other way around, right? You might say, oh, there's my poor self, there's my introvert self, there's my scared self, and so on. The next term you might want to write down and fully understand is the spotlight effect. And we're going to illustrate this through a little clip we made.
Oh my god, I look so dumb. Everyone's gonna be looking at me and thinking I look like I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, what am I gonna do? What's Will gonna think? Dude, how do I look?
Bro, you look fine. Oh, I gotta worry about this right now.
Dude, I'm worried everyone's just gonna be looking at me. I mean, clearly everyone wants to see what I'm wearing, so maybe they'll think I'm weird or something.
No, bro, you're fine, bro. They're not gonna look at you. They're gonna be looking at me. This hair is like 4 inches off today. What is up with my hair, bro? They're gonna be looking at my hair, not you.
Okay, so the purpose of that clip was to show you what the spotlight effect is. Now, this is basically when we obsess over our appearance and we think that everyone is focusing their attention on us, essentially creating a virtual spotlight. The ironic thing is, however, is everyone thinks like this sometimes. So while you might think everyone is paying attention to you, they're really just paying attention to themselves and how they appear to others. Okay, let's move on. So now we're going to talk about 2 new terms, self-esteem and self-efficacy. So these are kind of similar because they both relate to how you view yourself, but there is a key difference. So self-esteem is more like, how do you rank yourself? What value do you give yourself? Whereas self-efficacy is, how do you rank your ability to get things done? What's your how you rank your ability to be effective, to get your work done.
Okay, next, let's talk about the costs of self-esteem and understand 4 key terms. First, let's talk about excessive optimism, which is when someone is optimistic too often, and it can actually be harmful to their success. Excessive optimism leads to complacency in one's life and prevents us from seeing real-life risks. But let's also understand blindness to one's own incompetence, which is when we are blind to the fact that we actually aren't very good at something. A common example of this is when people are too optimistic about their abilities to cram before a big test. Students always perform better by studying in advance, not cramming. But overly optimistic students may regularly decide to trust themselves a little bit too much and cram the period before, even though it never works out in the end. Am I right, Will?
No, stop exposing me on the internet, bro.
Let's also understand self-serving bias, which is when we perceive ourselves through a favorable lens and we take credit for our successes but blame others for our failures. And this can lead to narcissism, which is an excessive self-love and self-absorption and can be caused by each of the previously mentioned terms and can be detrimental to someone's success. But let's also understand how, by recognizing this dark side of self-esteem, psychologists identify two types of self-esteem: defensive and secure. Defensive self-esteem is fragile. Defensive people may respond to threats with anger or aggression because they want to feel like they're in control. Secure self-esteem, on the other hand, is stable. To feel accepted for who we are and not for our looks, material wealth, or praise relieves pressure and can foster a positive environment for growth.
The last thing we're going to talk about in this video is the culture versus the self section. Now, Myers explains this as a difference between individualists and collectivists. You are probably a combination of the both. Individualism is basically when you value your own victory over your group's victory, and collectivism is the opposite. If you play sports, for example, you probably have one person on your team who gets excited whenever the team wins. A team's victory is a victory for them. But then you also have people on your team that are more about their own victories. Yeah, the team might win, but they are only satisfied when their scores are optimal. Alright everyone, thanks so much for watching. Make sure to
Wow. You really think that you can film this outro by yourself?
It's just the outro.
Oh, I don't want to hear it.
My bad. Alright, you want to get
Thank you guys for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and we'll see you guys next time.